I'm recording this today in my studio on the Isle of Seal, and really trying to put together a little homily, some thoughts on the writing of short stories, and on the short stories that have been gathered into a book of my selected ones with the title Winter Tales, and that was published by SPCK in London a few years ago. But to go back a bit, far before that time, and to think about where short stories came from, the truth is that I always yearned to write them. Yes, I was first and always a poet. And for me, there's some kind of intrinsic linkage between the poem and the short story, although I don't think I can go into ridiculous detail to try to explain what that linkage is, but there's somehow a connection. There's something boiled down. It's a tiny world, a short story, akin to a poem, which is what I want a real narrative poem to be. It's a boiled down world. And when I was growing up, living in Highland Perthshire, I was reading a lot of short stories. I've always preferred novellas and short stories to the longer forms of things. I've always struggled with the Anna Kareninas and the War and Pieces of this world. So I loved the Russian short stories. I loved Irish short stories, Scottish short stories, and so on. And then, much later, much more recently, I was translating them from Norwegian. I started off translating the short stories of my great hero of contemporary Norwegian writing, Lars Saabye Christensen, whose novel The Half-Brother I went on to translate, which is anything but a short story. It's a novel of 700 pages. But the first thing I ever translated, and which was published, the first bit of translation I ever did that was published, was one of his short stories, a magnificent gem of a thing. And I still think that despite his skill at writing long novels, I think his greatest talent is for the short story. But all of that set to one side, the truth is that I struggled to write short stories myself. And it's a bit like looking at a Sudoku and wondering where it was that you made the mistake. And the mistake has been lost in many mistakes, perhaps. I look now back at that landscape where I was writing, and I'm not entirely sure why it was that I struggled so much with the short story. I was writing a good deal of full-length fiction, which was published, novels like Glenlyon and The Well of the North Wind, and before them, my trilogy of novels. I found that longer form actually easier to do, paradoxically enough. I think short stories, there's a real knack to them. I think we all know that. And I just didn't get it. I didn't manage to work out what that knack was. I say in my introduction to Winter Tales that I feel becoming a translator of them was of great assistance. So actually looking at the way Lars Saabye Christensen was constructing them, putting them together, I think subliminally was of great help to me. I was, of course, concerned with the task of translation first and foremost. I wasn't looking at how this short story was created. But I think being so close to his work, and isn't that fascinating, closer in a way to his work than he was to it, because I know that when I write the words of a novel or short story now, and when I'm in the flow, then I'm writing close on 1,000 words in an hour. When you're translating that story into a new language, you're lucky if you manage 300 or 400 words an hour. So it's a much slower, self-evidently a much slower, more laborious process. You're in closer to the words. You're looking at them, you're holding them in the light and working out the best way of bringing them into a new language. So I suspect that something of that crafting process became clearer to me, but on a subliminal level when I was working with those stories of Lars's. That's, if I'm right, then I am. I don't know that I am. I'm just guessing, but I'm guessing honestly, and I think that might have helped. Maybe time was what helped. At any rate, I think about the first stories that I finally did get published, both here in Scotland and abroad, and the first stories, because it was about that time. And this was, a different time. How sad to look back on that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was a short story every day, as many of you who listen to this will remember, on BBC Radio 4. And it was always at the same time every day. And of course, there were thousands and thousands, sackloads of stories sent in by would-be writers. And most of those were knocked back and never saw or heard the light of day, is a better verb. And I was fortunate enough to keep at it. And I worked with a lovely producer by the name of Kirsty Williams in Glasgow, and she was one of those who was responsible for the daily short story. And in due course, I had my first one broadcast, and it was it was a wonderful feeling. And I became used to writing stories to that length. And I remember to this day exactly what they had to be, about 2,150 words. And if that sounds terribly prescriptive and enclosing, then actually, in the end, I became used to writing. I still am, I think, quite used to writing stories that naturally end at about 2,000 words, 2,000 and a bit words, and are then boiled down to something which is 13, 14 minutes of broadcasting. One of the first ones that I wrote, and which was broadcast on Radio 4, which was published both here and in America, was a story called Lemon Ice Cream. And I wanted to use this to serve as an example. It's one of the stories in Winter Tales, and it's one of my very favourite stories that I have managed to find ever. I think the important thing to say is that these stories of 2,000 or something words are always written in one sitting. As I said from the outset, I'm recording this in my studio, my special set-away place, and it's my one requirement as a writer, is absolute and complete silence. There's no room for compromise. It has to be that, or else I don't bother writing. I need hours and hours of complete and utter silence. And here on Seal, I am disturbed by little more than wild geese overhead. What a privilege it is to be able to say that. But it's true. It's absolutely true. When I'm to get back to what I wanted to say about the short story, when I know that a story is to be written, it all has to come out at one go. It's not a question of writing a story in 2 or 3 chunks. That's impossible to me. Of course, inevitably with a novel, you can't sit in a sanctified space and write it in one go. That's ridiculous. It has to be a lengthy process. It has to be coming to the quiet space every new day and writing, 1,000-2,000 words, and then going and leaving the pen and working on something else and coming back to it the following day. But with a short story, I need to do it all, capture it all in one burst. And what I hope to do, what generally happens, is that I get into what I like to call a space of deep writing. What do I mean by that? Well, if things are working well, and they aren't always, I make no bones about that, but if they are working well, then what happens is that I go into, what shall we say, how shall I express it, in the most honest way I can. It's a deep place, a deep space, and I suppose I've practiced this over the years. It's like It's going down into the mine to work at the mining of words. You're in a terribly deep spiritual place. You are far away, if you like, from the real world, in inverted commas. Yes, of course, I'm still in my studio, but in many ways I don't feel that I am. It's a TARDIS. The studio space is taking me somewhere else. It's taking me to rural Ireland and to a story there between a child and her father. It's taking me to a family of Sicilians who are preparing to leave their family home after 6 generations of life there for a new life in America. It's at the end of the First World War on the German side, and a man who is deafened after a terrible explosion. You are being taken into a new world for a time, and it's an intensely rich experience. And the truest way that I can put it is to say that I'm more there than I am here. And I know that that may sound like self-aggrandizement, it may sound pretentious. I can't help it, I don't care. It's the truth. That's where I'm taken. I am, if the magic is working, then I'm swirled into a new place. And it's an incredible privilege, an incredible joy to be there. I might not feel that at the time, but it is afterwards. It's euphoric. I come away, I have to be careful after a long writing session because I am trembling. Sometimes my hands are shaking because I feel such a sense of euphoria. It is quite drug-like. Yeah, I don't need any laudanum to get to that place. All I need is silence. And I'm transported. And this, I have to stress, happens now and again. It does not happen. The good thing is, what I can say is it happens more frequently because I have done this so often now. And I'm becoming well practiced. I'm getting into that deep place, that deep space more efficiently, more frequently than in the past. And that's exciting. That feels exciting. So I, as it were, I'm living with my characters, or I'm becoming one of those characters. If I'm not writing as me, but as writing as somebody from a Sicilian family or from an Irish family or whatever it might be, or if I'm an omniscient narrator, I'm seeing these people before me. I'm with them. I know them. I know them. I know everything about them. And it's quite hard to leave them to come up for air at the end of an hour, 2 hours of writing. Generally we'll write a short story like that, of that kind of length, in an hour and a half, 2 hours. And I stress that's a first draft. I write very fast, 1,000 words an hour. And the more I write like that, the deeper I get into that place. So the paradox is that I can't write slowly. I've never been able to write slowly. It's an impossibility. It just simply doesn't work. And my friend Roselle, my great writing friend Roselle Angwin, she talks about scaffolding. And I think that's a very wise expression. What does she mean by that? Well, something about the nuts and bolts of writing fiction, perhaps, or writing poetry for that matter, writing anything creative. When you come to the revision process, which I always do, of course, those 2,000 words or 2,000 and something words that have been poured out onto the page, that's not as though they're finished. I have to read that piece aloud. I'm combing it and combing it and combing it 20, 30, 40 times over however many days. So the redrafting process actually takes far, far longer than the outpouring. Far longer. And so it should do. It's hugely important. A lot of it involves reading it aloud, listening, holding the words up to the light, watching them, listening them, weighing them, making sure that every single word counts, that everyone is justified. And yes, I've lost the train of my thought over that. But I think that, yes, scaffolding, Roselle's scaffolding. What I find is that inevitably, when I'm getting into that piece of writing, I'm not in the deep place yet. Imagine it like going into a loch to swim. And lochs often go into deep water very, very quickly. What I find is that when I'm still in the shallows, my words they're getting there, but they're not there yet. And similarly, at the end, I'm climbing out. And often I think that Roselle's words about getting rid of scaffolding are very important. Once the building is constructed, you don't need the scaffolding anymore. And particularly those opening paragraphs or opening words, they can, I beg your pardon, those can be knocked out. My lunch was coming back to haunt me there. Those words can be knocked out and taken away because the rest is complete. And that's it. So the combing process will take however long it takes. I don't usually give it to anyone else. Sometimes I'll give a short story to Christina, my partner, to see what she makes of it, because she is most astute. She's a very good writer herself, but she's a very efficient editor, a fearfully efficient editor. And it's wonderful, I think, to be able to exchange creative words with someone you really trust. And I trust her judgment very, very much. I might not like her judgment, but I certainly trust it. And she will almost invariably come back with something. If I'm fortunate, there's nothing. But almost invariably there'll be something, and I may not like it, but I will almost always come back and think after 2 days, you know what? She was right. And I'll change it in the light of wise words. So that's really my homily. I'm sad that wonderful Bookends isn't going to be happening as it usually does. I love the festival, and I love what Joy and Campbell have done up in Benderloch to make it possible. And I'm glad that I badgered them to do something, and boy have they done it. And it's really exciting to see how it has taken off. I think it's a privilege to feel part of it, whether directly or indirectly, and so to be providing this for the festival this year, however it's used, and may it be possible for the festival to happen again in 2021 and beyond that time, when things are restored to some kind of semblance of normality. And just in closing, to ask you to look for Winter Tales from SPCK, this book of my selected short stories. I would be grateful if you would do. And it's available from me. I have plenty of copies, and signed ones will always be a possibility. So the best way of getting one is simply to send me an email, and it's info@kennethsteven.co.uk. Thank you.